Gigi Luk, Assistant Professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Gigi, thank you so much for joining us at the Second International Forum on Global Management in Education. Gigi, your background is in psychology and neuroscience, and I would like to ask you a couple of questions that have to do with our brain. Many people wonder, there is this big word of brain plasticity. What does that really mean?
Brain plasticity is a term referring to our human capacity to change the networks in our brain in order to adapt to the behavior that we engage in every day.
Mm-hmm. So is there a cognitive development that we undergo from early childhood to adulthood? Do our perspectives on the world change?
Yes, certainly. So the window of opportunity, the golden window of opportunity is in early childhood. From roughly, I would say, 0 to 5. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine, those are the time when we're not really engaging in formal schooling. Mm-hmm. So what it does is, during that time, we are very sensitive in our senses. So in our touch, in our vision, mm-hmm. in our hearing, smelling. And during those times, what we're doing is trying to extract as much information in the environment as possible and synthesize it and make sense out of it. So during those 5 years, what happens in the brain is that we have an abundant number of neurons. Now, chances are, if you're living in an under-optimal situation, you don't have as much stimulation, or in the worst case, you don't have enough protection to protect this number of neurons, they will get pruned away.
Mm-hmm. And the lack of stimulation would actually do that. It would decrease the amount of neurons, as it were, and neural networks and neurons that are not being used and then go away, and you miss that opportunity. What are the critical periods, if you have some examples for that kind of development?
There are different types of critical period, depending on what you're talking about. For lower level processing, such as vision, the critical period is very early on during infancy. But for later, higher level cognitive abilities such as cognition, language, executive functions, the critical period, the golden period, is much later. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that we cannot change our brain at that time. Mm-hmm. What it means is, the earlier you start during those golden periods, the more likely you will achieve a high proficiency level, such as second language learning. But there is no cutoff point.
Mm-hmm. So the plasticity really remains throughout the human lifespan, to a higher or lesser degree. Right. And even adults can still learn new tricks.
Definitely. Even old adults can learn new tricks. And I'm not a big fan of the term critical period, because it has a very rigid biological undertone. Mm-hmm.
So if it doesn't happen here, then it will never happen again.
Right, exactly. I would prefer to call it a
Yeah.
sensitive period. So we're more sensitive to learning certain type of skills.
Well, the learning creates a higher impact.
Yeah.
So in an older age and more advanced age, people may actually take longer to learn something or to develop motor skills or whatever.
Right.
Gigi, what has been the development on a worldwide basis is to offer bilingual education in the schools. Mm-hmm. And here in Brazil, they start teaching that at the age of 6. Mm-hmm. They usually offer Portuguese and English lessons. Mm-hmm. What is the impact of that on a child, if it's possible to generalize?
Yeah, so of course it's very, there are different contextual situations that you can think about it. It really depends on the child's home language environment.
Home, like where the child lives,
right?
At home. Mm-hmm.
Right. So primarily, my experience so far in Brazil is that they mostly speak Portuguese, and then they're learning another language in school, for example. But those lessons are once a week or 2 hours a week. So is that sufficient?
Far and few in between.
Yeah. Right. And is that sufficient for them to call themselves fluent in English after 6 years of learning the second language? Pretty unlikely, because you don't have enough opportunity to expose a child to the situation, to social situation, to learn the language. Yeah.
So the language learning process should be more intense, more frequently, and also practice in different environments.
It should be immersed.
Immersed, and that also
means
in
the environment all the time.
Okay.
And when a child learns a new language, it's a big endeavor, and we can't only rely on teachers. We have to rely on the family, on the community. It's collaborative engagement.
That's a very interesting point. So you said, for example, the child speaks a certain language at home. Let's presume it is the language that is also spoken in the respective country. And then it learns another language at school, because it's one of the subjects. And there's then, I can imagine the situation of immigrants where they come to a new country, they have to adapt, they have to assimilate, and they speak their heritage language, I think you call it, at home. But they have to assimilate a new language.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about the differences if the parents do that with their child together and assimilate their new language, or if they insist on the heritage language? What's going on there?
So you're talking about two types of very different bilinguals here. One is trying to add a new language for the purpose of assimilation. The other group is trying to add a new language as an asset. So these two types of children, the one commonality across these two types of children is that they all need social support to learn a new language. For the heritage parents, for heritage language speaking parents, what they will have to do is, first of all, they have to respect their heritage language. So they have to respect it by talking it more and not put their heritage language in an inferior position. That's very important. And on the other hand, for those students who are already speaking a dominant language but learning another language as an asset, a foreign language learners, in those cases, what I usually see is it's very important for those parents, the parents of those students, to engage in the process of learning with the child.
Yeah, I see. Well, because it may actually be a new language to them also.
Right.
And there may be a lack of time involved.
Yeah, exactly. So it has to be a lot of social support in terms of language learning.
When I moved to different countries, I usually had to learn a new language, and it took me quite some time, and I struggled with it. But once I had it down, once I understood why people were saying what they're saying, it also helped me to understand the new culture that I was assimilating to.
Right.
What does learning different languages do to us? What does it do to our brain?
That's a very specific question, and of course I'm going to tell you I have no data on it. What does it do to our brain? It generates different connections, different sets of connections to make us aware of our environment. So cognition in Latin term is faculty of knowing. Okay, faculty of knowing also means you're more aware of the surrounding.
Yes.
So before I came to Brazil, I know nothing about Portuguese. So when I went to the airport, etc., I heard Portuguese, but it's not getting into my system because I cannot associate meaning, I can block them out. But since then, I started to learn a little bit about the language. So now, whenever I hear Portuguese, it started to get me into, I'm going to pay attention because I want to hear what it is.
Yeah.
So all these used to be noise in the environment, now become something meaningful.
Yes.
It has a meaningful representation in my mind. So what does it do to our minds? It makes us being aware of different types of information in the environment now.
Absolutely. When we learn other languages, that may actually help us reflect on our own language that we grew up with. And let's say there's an English-speaking person and that person learns Spanish, so that may actually help that person to understand the grammar of the English language. How does this relate to other languages? How does this correlate? Are there different examples? If an English-speaking person learns Chinese, for example, or the same?
Oh, that's a very drastic example. It would be very challenging. So I remember when I first trying to learn Portuguese, it's very challenging for me because my French, no matter how low proficiency is, start to interfere. Because there's a lot of things I can borrow from French, but it doesn't quite work that way. So there are a lot of similarity and a lot of differences. So the earliest stage when I'm trying to learn Portuguese, my interference from French, it's actually trying to help me because I'm trying to figure out what are the commonalities and what are the differences. And then since then, I just pay attention more to the commonalities because they help me. And I ignore the differences, and then I just treat it as new elements that I have to apply.
So it may actually both help you and also distract you at times, interfering with what you're learning.
Right.
Gigi Luk, it has been a pleasure to have you here in Brazil. Thank you so much for joining us, and I would like to take the opportunity to also let you know that it was a pleasure to have you as a professor. Thank you so much, and have a safe trip back home.